Learning to create tension and gauge swatches is critical for knitting well-fitting and pleasing garments. You can download my guide for knitting swatches for free. It includes detailed instructions on how to make them for both the standard and the bulky machines, plus my swatch tracking sheets. The link is in the video description below. The first swatch is the tension swatch. Start by casting on 40 stitches and just knit and pattern. I knit about 20 to 30 rows at each tension, separated by 2 rows of contrasting yarn to divide the tensions. At first, you can refer to the machine's manual to find the range of recommended tensions for each weight of yarn. As you gain experience and keep notes, you will have a pretty good feeling where to start and end. If the machine struggles, change the tension, add weights, or make other adjustments like waxing or spraying the yarn. Make sure to note any adjustments for each tension. How much weight was needed, the setting of the tension mast, the behavior of the machine at various tensions is all good information. While I knit this swatch, let's talk about why it's important. Often knitters do not determine the best tension for a particular yarn on their particular machine. Some just take a guess and jump into making the gauge swatch, if any swatch at all. That may be acceptable when size doesn't matter, as in charity knitting. After all, there is a head for every hat or a body for every sweater, but if the yarn is new to you, do a tension swatch anyway, as there are so many factors that impact tension. When it comes to yarns, different fiber contents behave differently. The same weight yarn varies immensely from brand to brand, and within the same brand, the yarn may even vary from color to color. When it comes to machines, each machine behaves slightly differently, and each knitter has their own style of operating their machine. While it's relatively easy to push a hesitant carriage over a few stitches, when you use a greater number of needles or work a vast number of rows, you may find yourself struggling through the project with your machine constantly objecting. The tension swatch helps you find the sweet spot tension for a particular yarn using the desired stitch pattern on a specific machine. As I knit, I found that big twist on my brother's 270 ran stiff at tension 8 and ran better starting at 8.1, but seemed to run best around 9. I didn't need any weights at all. It was duly noted on my tension swatch form. Once you've gone through the full range on the tension dial, take the swatch off the machine on waste yarn with open stitches. Give it a good tug lengthwise and set it aside to rest. Resting allows the yarn to relax and the stitches to return to their natural size. Relaxing takes at least a few hours, so I usually let it rest overnight. Once it has relaxed, examine the tension swatch. Now it will yield information about the yarn. Keeping the project in mind, how does the knitting feel? Is it too hard or too limp? Does it drape? Does it feel right for this project? In my example, I love the feel of the fabric at 9.1 for a little boy's sweater. The stitches were firm but not hard, plus I already knew the yarn ran nicely through the machine at that tension. I found my sweet spot tension. Later you can tear out the tension swatch since it often uses a lot of yarn. But for now, hang on to it as a reference. You may actually need it. Now we are ready to knit the second swatch, the gauge swatch. This is the one all the books and patterns suggest you make. Knit it at the sweet spot tension in the same stitch pattern and on the same machine as the tension swatch. The gauge swatch will be washed, dried, and blocked in the same way you plan to treat the garment because from it, we get the gauge. For the bulky machine, cast on 40 using waste yarn at the sweet spot tension. In our example, it is 9 and 1 click, and knit a few rows. Change to the main color and knit 10 rows. On the next row, we will create tension eyelets. Starting 5 needles from the right, using a one-eyed transfer tool, transfer the stitch on the 5th needle to the 6th, the 7th to the 8th, and so on, making the same number of eyelets as whole numbers on the tension dial, in this case 9. Now we will accommodate the number of clicks. Skip 4 needles. In the same manner, create an eyelet to represent the number of clicks in between the whole numbers. It'll be 0, 1, or 2. Since our tension is 9 and 1 click, you would create 1 more eyelet. Then knit 10 more rows. Knit 2 rows of contrasting yarn. Knit 10 more rows in the main color. Pull out the 11th needle right and the 11th needle to the left of 0 and manually knit each stitch with a short length of contrasting yarn. Knit 10 rows more and manually knit the 11th stitch on both sides of the 0 with the contrasting yarn once again. I like to create a loop in it and not the ends, as this is less likely to come undone in the wash. Knit 10 more rows in the main yarn. This gives you a total of 30 rows in the main color. Knit 2 rows in contrasting yarn. Then knit 10 rows in the main yarn. Knit a few more rows with the contrasting color and cut the yarn, leaving an 18-inch yarn tail. Thread the yarn tail into a double-eyed needle or yarn needle and remove the stitches from the machine onto the yarn tail. Arrange the stitches on the tail so they are not bunched together and secure the end with a few stitches. This ensures that the stitches do not come undone while going through the wash. Give the swatch a tug lengthwise as before and let the swatch relax overnight. Then wash, dry, and block the swatch in the same manner you plan to treat the garment. Now let's take a look at the gauge swatch. The reason you start making eyelets at the right edge is the purl side is most often the back side of the knitting. When you take the knitting off the machine, from the knit side, the tension eyelets will read from left to right, as in 9 and 1. If you do it the same way every swatch, you have built-in notations. Great when you are reviewing your swatches. When I washed and dried the swatch, it was limp. Well, the bottom line was tension 9-1 is not suitable for a boy's sweater. It could work for a different project since it has good drapey qualities, but not this project. So I returned to my tension swatch and notes and added more comments. Compared to the tension swatch, the gauge swatch was even looser than the tension at 10. This meant I needed to go down at least 2 clicks and try again. I remade my gauge swatch at 8 and 2 clicks to get a firmer fabric, but I also knew my machine worked well at this tension. Here is my new swatch, washed, dried, and perfect. Take the measurements from the right side of the fabric. First, measure the width of 20 stitches by taking the measurement between the 2 sets of side markers. Then, measure between the rows of contrasting yarn at the point of the side markers and in the center to determine the length of 30 rows. The center measurements are usually the most accurate, but if there is a slight variance between the measurements average the measurements for the width and average the measurements for the length. Note the measurements on your gauge swatch form. In this case, the width is 5 inches and the length is 5 5/16 inches. From here, you can calculate the stitches per inch and the rows per inch. Armed with your swatches, observations, and measurements, you are ready to create well-fitting garments. And that's coming soon. I hope this video was informative. Please take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell to get notifications of upcoming videos. Happy machine knitting!